Michael had always taken the same back road to work each morning. It was quiet, lined with woods on both sides, and rarely traveled by others that early. He liked it that way. It gave him time to think before the chaos of the day began at his small mechanic shop. But that cold January morning was different. Just ahead, by the ditch near the tree line, he spotted something lying in the snow at first. He thought it might be a pile of old clothes or garbage left behind. But as he drove closer, he saw it move. It was a dog. A large German shepherd, curled into a tight ball, her coat frosted with snow. Her head lifted slightly as his truck slowed to a stop, and their eyes met. There was no aggression in her gaze, only exhaustion. And something else, something that made Michael's heart tighten. Desperation. Michael pulled over, grabbed the thick blanket he kept in the back seat, and slowly stepped out. The air bit at his face, and his boots crunched over the frozen ground. The dog didn't move. She didn't bark, growl, or try to run. She just watched him quietly, her body trembling from the cold. He crouched a few feet away and spoke softly. "Hey, there. It's okay, girl. I'm not gonna hurt you." She tilted her head, as if listening to the tone in his voice. Her ears twitched, and she let out a soft whimper. Michael could see now that she was too thin. Her ribs showed through her coat, and there were patches of fur missing along her back legs. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Gently, he approached and wrapped the blanket around her. She didn't resist. In fact, she leaned into his arms as he lifted her. She was heavier than she looked, but limp in his grasp. As he carried her to the warmth of his truck, he noticed something else, her belly. It was slightly swollen, not with fat or injury. It was the kind of shape that only came from recent birth. "You've had puppies," he whispered. "Where are they, girl?" She looked up at him then, her brown eyes deep and full of something that nearly broke him. Worry. Once inside the truck, with the heater blasting, she curled on the passenger seat, wrapped in the blanket. Michael sat behind the wheel, unsure of what to do next. He couldn't take her to the shelter. He knew they were overwhelmed. And worse, he wasn't sure she'd survive the night without immediate care. So he called the local vet clinic, a small one he'd used before for a stray cat he'd found years ago. They told him to bring her in right away. The drive there felt longer than usual, even though the roads were empty. Every time Michael glanced over at the dog, he felt more sure that she had gone through something terrible. Yet somehow, she had trusted him enough to let him help her at the clinic. The staff was waiting. They took her in gently, examining her as Michael explained where he'd found her. The vet, a kind woman in her 60s named Dr. Green, looked grave as she felt the dog's abdomen and checked her vitals. "She's severely malnourished and dehydrated," she said quietly. "And yes, she's recently had puppies." Michael's heart sank. "Where are they?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. Dr. Green shook her head. "They're not with her. And from how she's acting, I'd say she's been trying to find help. She didn't come to the road by accident. She was trying to lead someone back." Michael stared at the dog through the exam room window. She was lying on a heated pad, eyes half closed, but not sleeping. She was waiting. Not for her own survival, but for someone to help the ones she couldn't bring. And Michael knew, without a doubt, that tomorrow he'd be going back to that snowy road. He couldn't ignore the silent cry she had delivered with her eyes. The next morning, Michael returned to the veterinary clinic before sunrise. The roads were still dusted in frost, and the air was even colder than the day before. He parked his truck and walked quickly inside, his breath fogging in front of him. A bell chimed softly as he opened the door, and the receptionist looked up with a small smile. "She's stable," she said quietly. "But she didn't sleep much." Michael nodded and followed her to the back, where the German Shepherd lay in a recovery kennel lined with soft blankets. A heat lamp glowed above her, and a bowl of untouched food sat beside her. When she saw him, her ears perked slightly, and her tail thumped once against the floor. He knelt beside the bars. "Hey, girl, you're safe now." She blinked slowly, but didn't look relieved. She looked expectant, as if she was still waiting for something to be finished. Dr. Green came into the room, holding a clipboard, her reading glasses slipping down her nose. "She's still dehydrated, but she's responding to fluids. No signs of injury, which is a small miracle. But she's clearly distressed," she said. "She keeps watching the door, like she's waiting for someone to walk in." Michael nodded. "Her puppies." Dr. Green sighed. "Yes, the maternal instinct is strong. She didn't come to that road by accident. She was seeking help." Michael stood slowly. "I'm going back. I need to find them." "You should know," Dr. Green warned gently. "If it's been more than a day, and the weather's been this cold, they may not—" "I still have to look," Michael interrupted, his voice firm. "She didn't give up on them. I won't either." By 8 a.m., Michael was back on the narrow back road, his boots crunching over frozen grass as he scanned the area where he first saw her. He studied the snow, looking for any trace of tracks. But much of the ground had been disturbed the day before, and new frost had settled since then. He moved farther into the woods, carefully checking beneath low bushes and fallen trees. After nearly an hour, he paused to catch his breath and listened. The forest was too quiet. Not a single bark or whimper. Still, something caught his eye. Broken twigs leading toward an old shed, half collapsed and leaning to one side. It was the kind of place no one would think to look. The door was hanging off one hinge, and snow had blown in through the cracks. As he stepped closer, Michael noticed faint paw prints in the snow smaller than a full-grown dog's. He crouched and followed them, his heart beating faster with each step. He reached the doorway, pushed it open carefully, and peered inside. The shed was dark and musty, filled with broken furniture and forgotten tools. But in the corner, beneath an old cabinet, something stirred. A cardboard box. He moved quickly now, kneeling beside it. Inside were 5 tiny German Shepherd puppies, barely more than a week old. Their eyes were still shut, their fur matted, and their tiny bodies huddled close together for warmth. One let out a weak, squeaky cry. 2 of them were frighteningly still. Michael's breath caught. He reached in, gently lifting the smallest one and pressing it to his chest. Its body was cool, but not cold. Alive, but fading. Without a second thought, he removed his coat, wrapped all 5 pups inside, and cradled them against his chest. He rushed back to the truck, talking to them the entire way. "Hang on, little ones, just hang on." As he drove back to the clinic, his eyes were fixed on the road, but his thoughts were already on the mother. She had left them in that shelter and risked everything to go for help. She had chosen the right person. Now it was up to him to make sure she didn't lose everything she had fought so hard to protect. Michael didn't stop for traffic or coffee, or even to think. The only thing on his mind was the fragile bundle in his lap. The puppies made barely a sound now. They were so small, so still, that he kept checking to make sure they were breathing. He turned up the heat in the truck, pressing them tighter against his chest to keep them warm. Every bump in the road felt like an eternity. When he arrived at the clinic, he didn't wait for a receptionist. He burst through the door, coat clutched. Close, eyes wide with urgency. Dr. Green was already on her feet, rushing over as she saw his expression. "I found them," he said, breathless. 5 of them. 2 aren't moving. Dr. Green motioned to the vet technicians, who quickly cleared a table and brought over blankets and equipment. Michael laid the coat down carefully, and the staff got to work. Tiny heating pads were slipped beneath the pups, and warm fluids were administered drop by drop through syringes. The room filled with focused silence. The German Shepherd, the mother, was in a kennel nearby. When she heard the tiny squeals, she rose on shaky legs and pushed, her nose against the bars. Her ears perked and her eyes locked onto the scene. Then came a soft, trembling whimper. She knew. They were hers. Michael turned to Dr. Green. "Can we bring her closer?" Dr. Green hesitated only a second, then nodded. "If it calms her, it might help them too." Carefully, they opened the mother's kennel and led her to the table where her puppies lay. She walked slowly, limping slightly, but her strength seemed to return with every step. When she reached the table, she gently nudged one of the pups with her nose, licking its tiny head. The others stirred, sensing her presence. "She's doing better than I expected," Dr. Green whispered. "That connection, it might just save them." For the next hour, the clinic team worked nonstop with Michael by their side. Two of the puppies responded quickly, whimpering, stretching, and reaching for warmth. Another slowly began to move. But the smallest one remained still, its breathing faint. Michael watched, barely blinking. The mother didn't leave the table. She rested her head near the pups, her eyes full of worry, but also something else, relief. Her mission, impossible as it had seemed, had brought them all together again. Eventually, Dr. Green stepped back and let out a slow breath. "3 are stable. 1 is still critical. And 1," she paused, "didn't make it." Michael felt the weight of those words press into his chest. He looked down at the lifeless pup and gently placed a hand on the mother's head. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. The mother nuzzled the still puppy once more, then turned her attention to the others. She lay down beside them, letting them crawl toward her warmth. It was a quiet moment, filled with both grief and hope, that Michael sat on a nearby bench, his eyes fixed on the scene. It was heartbreaking, but also beautiful. This dog, abandoned and starving, had not given up. She had done what no one expected. She had gone for help. And by pure chance or fate, Michael had been there to see her. He didn't know what would happen next. The puppies still had a long road ahead, and the mother was far from healed. But one thing was clear: she had fought for them, and now it was his turn to fight for her. As he looked around the room, filled with quiet determination and gentle care, Michael knew that his life had changed. He didn't just save a dog from the cold. He had walked into a story that was just beginning. Michael returned to the clinic early the next morning. The waiting room was quiet, filled with soft music and the faint scent of antiseptic. He gave a gentle knock on the staff door and was greeted by a familiar face, Samantha, one of the vet techs. "She's doing better," she said with a smile. "And the pups, they're still holding on." Michael followed her down the hallway, feeling a quiet mix of nerves and hope. The mother, whom the staff had started calling Hope, was lying in a larger kennel now, her body curled protectively around 3 tiny puppies. She looked up when she saw him, ears lifting slightly, and gave a soft, pale wag. He knelt beside her. "Good girl," he whispered. The smallest puppy, the one they had almost lost the night before, was snuggled tightly between its siblings. Its tiny chest rose and fell in soft, shallow breaths. Dr. Green entered moments later with a warm expression. "She's accepting food now," she said, nodding toward Hope, "and the puppies are nursing again. It's fragile progress, but it's progress." Michael felt an enormous weight begin to lift from his shoulders. Still, something lingered. A question he couldn't stop thinking about since the day he found her. Where did she come from? He asked. She didn't just end up out there on her own. Dr. Green sighed, her eyes thoughtful. "We scanned her for a microchip. Nothing. No collar. But she's clearly not wild. Her behavior, her attachment to humans, even the way she looked at you, that's a dog who had a home once. Michael nodded. Someone left her behind. They had no proof, no way to know who, but his gut told him she hadn't wandered off. She had been abandoned with her puppies. And when the cold crept in and food ran out, she had gone to find help the only way she knew how. Later that day, Michael reached out to a local animal rescue volunteer named Denise. She worked with a group that specialized in tracking lost or abandoned pets. When he described Hope, she grew quiet. "I think I've seen her before," Denise said. "A house about 15 miles from where you found her. Foreclosed. The people? Moved out fast. Neighbors said there was a dog tied up in the backyard days after they left." Michael's chest tightened. She must have broken free, found shelter, gave birth. And then she came looking, Denise said. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. It wasn't just luck that Hope had ended up near that road. It was intention. She had made the journey not for herself, but for the tiny lives depending on her. That evening, Michael visited Hope and the pups again. He brought a few treats, which she gently accepted. The puppies were starting to move more, their legs wobbling, tiny whimpers sounding stronger than before. Michael sat on the floor beside them and watched in silence. He felt something shift inside him. He had always considered himself just a regular guy fixing cars, minding his own business. But now, he was part of something bigger. Something that started with a cold, shivering dog on the side of a road. Dr. Green stopped by once more before leaving for the night. She looked down at Hope and her pups and said, "You know, not every person would have stopped for a dog, especially not on a freezing morning like that." Michael shook his head slowly. "I didn't stop because I knew what she'd been through. I stopped because she looked at me like I was the only one left who could help." Outside the window, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. But inside, there was warmth of life, of healing, and of a mother who had never given up. The next few days passed in a blur for Michael. He went to work during the day, but his heart stayed at the clinic. Every evening, he returned to check on Hope and her puppies, and each time he walked in, it felt more like visiting family than visiting a vet office. The bond between them had deepened. Hope no longer looked wary when he arrived. She lifted her head, wagged her tail, and watched his every move with quiet trust. The puppies, though still fragile, were gaining strength. Their eyes were starting to open, tiny blue slivers blinking. Up at the light, their squeaks became louder, their movements more energetic. But the smallest one, the pup that had barely survived, still struggled to keep up. While the others wriggled and stretched, he often stayed curled. Slower and weaker. Dr. Green gave Michael the update he'd been dreading. "He's not thriving like the others," she said gently. "We're doing everything we can. But this one might not make it unless something changes soon." Michael stood beside the tiny pup, watching its slow breathing, its thin limbs twitching as it tried to move toward its mother. He clenched his fists. He had come too far with them to lose one now. "What can we do?" he asked. Dr. Green hesitated. "We've given fluids, warmth, and supplements, but some puppies just don't have the strength. If he had a name, maybe it would help. Sometimes when they're named, they feel real, wanted." Michael knelt beside the pup, heart aching. "Then his name is Chance," he said quietly, "because that's all he needs. Just one more chance." That night, Michael didn't leave the clinic. He stayed by Chance's side, helping bottle feed him every couple of hours, wrapping him in blankets and holding him against his chest as he slept. Hope would nuzzle her tiny pup from time to time, and Michael saw in her eyes the same fear he was carrying. She knew he was the weakest. By morning, Chance stirred. Just a small movement. Then another. His breathing steadied. When Michael held out the bottle, Chance latched on, suckling for the first time without coaxing. It wasn't much. But it was something. "He's fighting," Dr. Green said with a soft smile. "You gave him that." Michael smiled, though his eyes were glassy with exhaustion. "He gave it to himself. I just didn't let him fight alone." Word of the story started spreading. The receptionist at the clinic had shared a photo of Hope and her pups on social media, along with a short version of what happened. By the end of the week, dozens of messages flooded in, people offering to help, donate, or even adopt when the time came. But Michael wasn't ready to think about that. Not yet. One evening, as he walked Hope on a leash behind the clinic, she stopped near a patch of snow-covered grass and sniffed the air. Then, out of nowhere, she looked up at him and let out a quiet bark. It was the first time she'd made a sound since the day he found her. "You're finally speaking, huh?" he said, smiling. She barked again, softer this time, and leaned into his side. It was as if she was saying thank you, in her own way. Hope was healing. So were her puppies. And Michael was beginning to realize something he hadn't admitted before. He wasn't just helping them recover. They were helping him, too. They were pulling him out of his quiet routine, out of the numb days and silent nights, and into something alive, something full of meaning. A new purpose. A new chapter. And he wasn't about to turn the page without them. While the days at the clinic passed with small victories, puppies nursing on their own, Hope growing stronger, Chance beginning to crawl, Michael still couldn't shake the question that lingered in the back of his mind. Where had Hope come from? He felt like the story wouldn't be complete until he knew. Someone had let her down. Someone had walked away from her and her newborn pups, leaving them to face a brutal winter alone. Michael wanted answers. Not for revenge, but for closure. Called Denise, the local rescue volunteer who'd mentioned the foreclosed house near where Hope had been found. That afternoon, they drove together to the address. The neighborhood was quiet, with small houses pressed shoulder to shoulder. At the end of the block sat a boarded-up house, its front yard overgrown and dusted with snow. A rusted mailbox leaned forward, and a chain-link fence hung open in the back. "This is it," Denise said, pointing. Neighbors reported hearing barking after the family left, but by the time animal control arrived, the yard was empty. Michael walked through the snow-covered yard, past broken flower pots and scattered toys. Behind the house, he found a chewed-up leash still tied to a post. The collar attached to it was broken. Hope had broken free. He stood there in silence, imagining her alone in this yard, pregnant, abandoned, and somehow giving birth in the cold. And when her food ran out, her strength low, she must have carried or moved the puppies somewhere safer, hidden them, and then set out alone searching for help. That help had turned out to be him. Michael knelt and picked up the leash, then noticed something else. Taped inside the storm door was a faded notice from the bank. The date matched the week before he had found Hope. She had been surviving on her own for more than a week in bitter cold. And she had managed to keep her puppies alive. Back at the truck, Michael looked at Denise. "Can we report this?" he asked. "We can," she said. "But with no proof of who left her or when, it may not go far. What matters is she got out." Michael held the broken leash in his hands, then set it down on the seat beside him. "Yeah," he said softly. "She did more than that. She survived. She saved them." When they returned to the clinic, Michael went straight to see Hope. She was lying in her kennel, nursing all 3 of her remaining pups. When she saw him, she stood and wagged her tail. He knelt beside her and gently stroked her head. "I found where you came from," he said quietly. "You were tied up, left behind, but you didn't give up. Hope leaned against the bars, her eyes never leaving his. "She's amazing," Dr. Green said from behind him. "What she did, it defies instinct. Most dogs wouldn't have survived out there, let alone gone searching for help." Michael nodded. "She chose to save them. That's not just instinct. That's love." Dr. Green smiled. "And now you're part of that story." Michael sat with Hope for a long time that evening. The clinic had offered to keep her and the pups for as long as needed, but something had already shifted in Michael's heart. They didn't feel like someone else's animals anymore. They felt like family, and Michael had already made up his mind. Hope had come looking for a miracle, that she had no idea that she'd end up becoming one for someone else. Spring was just beginning to break through the long winter when Michael finally brought Hope and her puppies home. The snow had melted, and patches of green peeked through the yard behind his small house. The moment he opened the car door, Hope jumped out with her usual calm but purposeful stride. She sniffed the grass, looked up at the front porch, and then back at Michael, as if to say, "Is this it? Are we really staying?" "Yes," he said aloud, smiling. "This is home." The puppies, now almost 2 months old, waddled around the yard in clumsy circles, tumbling over their own feet, barking at butterflies, and trying to nibble on everything in sight. Chance, the smallest of the litter, was still slower than the others, but had grown stronger day by day. He always stayed closer to Hope, never far from her side. Inside the house, Michael had set up a cozy space for all of them. Blankets, chew, toys, food bowls, and a soft dog bed by the fireplace. Hope explored each room as if mapping it out. Then she curled up on the rug in front of the fire, with the pups nestled against her belly. Michael sat down on the couch and watched them for a long time. He never imagined that his quiet, predictable life would change so completely in just a few weeks. But now, it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. Friends and neighbors who had seen the story online began to stop by with donations, bags of food, puppy toys, even handmade collars. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Langley, brought over a knitted blanket for the brave mama, as she called Hope. Another family offered to help cover the vet bills. Everyone in the community seemed to rally around this little miracle family. They weren't just dogs to them anymore. They were survivors, symbols of strength. And Michael, the man who had stopped on a freezing road, was now known around town as the quiet hero. But Michael didn't feel like a hero. He often said, "I didn't save them. Hope saved them. She just needed someone to believe in her." And he meant it. As the days passed, Michael spent every spare moment training the pups, playing with them in the yard, and bonding with Hope in quiet moments by the fire. He named the other 2 pups Max and Luna. Max was adventurous, always trying to climb things he shouldn't. Luna was clever and watchful, already figuring out how to open the back door with her nose. And Chance, small, gentle, and always following. Hope had become Michael's shadow. Every time he sat down, Chance would crawl into his lap. It was as if the little pup had imprinted on him during those long nights at the clinic and never let go. Dr. Green visited one afternoon to check on their progress. When she saw them all together, healthy, happy, and safe, she wiped away a tear. "You did more than rescue them," she said. "You gave them something many dogs never get. A second chance and a forever home." Michael looked down at Hope, who had now settled at his feet. "I think they gave that to me too." Hope looked up at him, her eyes soft, warm, and steady. It was the same look she'd given him that day by the road. The one that had stopped him in his tracks. The one that had changed everything. Months passed, and the small house that once echoed with silence now hummed with life. The morning routine began with the sound of tiny paws skittering across the hardwood floors. Max usually woke first, followed closely by Luna, both racing each other to the back door. Chance, always a bit slower, would trot behind, his ears flopping with every bounce. Hope waited patiently near the kitchen, her eyes on Michael, as if reminding him it was breakfast time for everyone. Michael's life had completely changed. The quiet, routine-driven days he once lived had been replaced by joyful chaos. Toys scattered the living room floor. There was always a bowl to refill, a mess to clean, or a game of tug-of-war to join. And yet, it never felt overwhelming. It felt right. He had turned one simple act of kindness into a lifelong commitment. What started as helping a freezing dog had grown into building a home, not just for Hope and her pups, but for himself as well. The story of Hope had reached far beyond the neighborhood. After a local reporter published a feature titled, "The Dog Who Found Her Own Rescue," media outlets across the country picked it up. People from all over wrote letters, some sharing stories of animals they had saved, others saying they'd been inspired to adopt themselves. A children's book author even reached out, asking if she could turn the story into something to inspire young readers. But Michael remained humble through it all. "I didn't plan to be anyone's hero," he told a local TV station. "I just did what I hoped someone would have done if they found her first." Despite the attention, Michael never considered giving the dogs away. Offers came in, people wanting to adopt the puppies, especially Chance, whose journey had touched thousands of hearts. But every time someone asked, Michael found himself shaking his head with a soft smile. "They already have a home," he'd say. "They found it the moment she looked at me." One warm evening in early summer, Michael sat on the porch with Hope beside him and the pups lying at their feet. Fireflies danced over the yard, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of crickets and distant laughter from a neighbor's barbecue. He looked down at Hope and gently ran his fingers through her fur. Her body was healthy now, her coat thick and glossy, her eyes bright with peace. She rested her head on his knee and let out a deep, contented sigh. "She trusted me before I even knew her," he whispered. "And somehow she knew I needed this, too." In the distance, Chance chased a butterfly with the clumsy energy of a pup who had no memory of the cold, dark shed he was once found in. He tripped, rolled, then got up and sprinted after it again, tail wagging like a banner of joy. Michael smiled. That little life, once hanging by a thread, was now filled with nothing but light. As the stars came out, Michael leaned back in his chair and looked around at the life he never expected to have. The dogs had not just survived. They had transformed him. They had given his quiet world a heartbeat. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he wasn't worried. With Hope at his side and 3 joyful pups filling his home, he had everything he needed, because sometimes the best stories don't start with a plan. Sometimes they begin on the side of a cold road, with a single moment of trust that changes everything.